You've got an amazing book idea, but if you can't explain what your story is in two sentences, you don't actually have a solid story yet. The authors who can do this actually finish drafts and finish and revise those drafts faster, not to mention far more effectively for books readers want to read because they have those two sentences guiding them. So, in this video, I'll show you a simple formula for writing this guiding premise to get you there too. Because until you reach that level of clarity, you'll likely stay stuck in the ideas phase, even if that looks like ever changing drafts, never fully committing to which story you're telling. In her recent TEDx talk, The Art of Discomfort, author Lee Bardugo notes that many artists fail before they ever really begin. Too often, the excitement of the idea phase is comfortable, but making that idea work and seeing it through to a finishable novel is not so comfortable. Bardugo identifies the underlying root cause as an intolerance for the discomfort required to commit to one idea long past its honeymoon phase, leading writers to chase shiny new ideas instead. Your guiding premise forces you to commit to the core driver of your story, giving you an expectation to meet to help you through those less comfortable stages of the novel writing process. It won't save you the discomfort, but it can save you from endlessly rewriting unwieldy material for years, always switching to the next greater thing when it gets uncomfortable. So you need to cut to the core of your story's promise in two sentences, test its capacity for a whole novel, and commit to seeing it through. That's what we'll do right now. To make it easier to get to two sentences, use this simple formula. Character, the who, plus situation, when and or where, plus goal, what said character must do, times why, the stakes, equals premise. Yep, times for the stakes, because the stakes aren't just in addition to the main story elements, they apply to each element. You can string those components together in just about any order to create a one or two sentence summary. However, I recommend starting with the character as soon as possible. Just like in your story, a reader can't care about the other pieces until they have a character lens to judge them through. This gives you the clarity you need to move forward, keeping the core promise of your story front and center, what you need to deliver ultimately to your readers. Let's break that down. And if you don't know which of your story ideas to work on, or you want to better follow along through this whole process step by step with examples, guided prompts, and more guidance on idea selection, you can follow along inside my free novel premise course, linked in the description below. Your guiding premise is basically the concept, the super short summary of what your story is about. It boils a story down to the most essential parts needed to make up a story. It answers the journalistic five W's essentially. So use the who, what, when, where, why to help you more easily formulate a draft of your guiding premise. Answer: who is the story about? What must that character do? Where does the action occur? When does the story take place? Why is the story important? Its stakes. Once you've brainstormed your answers to these questions for your story idea, plug them in as best you can to the formula for a rough, stripped down summary of your story. Let me show you this in practice. For example, I accidentally came up with a nearly complete high level outline for a romantasy novel in this video, simply going through my ley line theme process. And I used my spellbook outline template to flesh it out. So if you need more fodder for your idea in the first place, or if you're struggling to decide which direction to take your idea, that might not be a bad option for you either. Normally, I make writing the guiding premise the first step with authors from the early planning stages to late revision stages. But if you haven't yet grown that initial seed of your story idea far enough to answer the five W's, well, first of all, trying anyway is still useful for seeing what you don't know yet about your story. And this premise work can get you coming up with potential options. But I can say in all sincerity that going through the spellbook outline template process is apparently quite effective for growing out your idea too. So you can grab that template with its supporting processes at inkybookworm.com/courses/spellbook or in the description below. But even with the template, you still need this guiding premise to keep you on track. So I'll show you my process of shaping that romantasy idea into a guiding premise. Step one, start with the character, the who. I need to establish my protagonist. My romantasy idea is about Rose. And who is Rose? She's a callous woman who is consumed by the grief of losing her husband of many years. So now she believes it is better never to love than to suffer loss again. Step two, define the goal. What must they do? The goal is the main external plot objective the character must pursue. For Rose, she must admit her feelings and fight off the invading enemy. Step three, establish the situation or context. This is the where and or when. The situation or context provides the immediate setting or inciting incident that kicks off the main plot conflict. For Rose, I could say it's all happening after the loss of her husband and in a dragging riding battalion when she's put into command long past her prime and an enemy is invading. Step four, determine the stakes. This is why it matters. The stakes, or why, establishes the importance of the objective, ideally tying the external and internal consequences together. So, why must Rose admit her feelings and fight off the enemy? And what happens if she fails? Well, she'll doom her own heart and those she never admitted she loved. Step five, assemble the premise draft. Finally, assemble the components into a one or two sentence summary. I can start by plugging in my answers to the five W's in a direct way simply to get something to work with. Character, who is Callous Rose, plus situation, the when and where, is in command in a dragon battalion, long past her prime during an enemy invasion. Plus the goal, what the character must do, which is must admit her feelings and fight off the enemy, times why, the stakes, which are or doom her own heart and those she never admitted she loved. And that strung together is a crude premise. Then I can put it into sentence structure from there with a little more finesse. That might look like after the loss of her husband, Callous Rose is put in command in a dragon riding battalion during an enemy invasion. But if Rose can't acknowledge her feelings, she'll doom her own heart and the officer and dragon she never admitted she loved. Okay, even in this initial guiding premise draft, I have more clarity about what the story really is. It forces some structure to this idea. But I know boiling your entire novel down to two sentences might still feel impossible. For most of the sci fi and fantasy writers I've worked with on this, they don't know how to explain their epic world and its conflict that concisely, no matter how hard they try. They feel they need more space to explain everything that it is, and so it turns into a jacket copy length paragraph instead. That's nice to have, but not as useful for our purposes in writing a guiding premise to guide story and revision decisions. So, if this is you right now and there's just so much more to your story that you feel needs to be captured than two sentences can hold, The reality is that this is probably your fear talking, or quite equally possible, that intolerance we have for discomfort, especially if you're realizing you don't know how to pin your story down in these two sentences, even with a formula. You might be afraid to commit to one main thing in your story, or you might be afraid this story you love will appear too crude when brought into the light without all the cool little details you dreamed up for it. Without the full context, how will you get anyone to understand how awesome it all is in your head? Or underneath all that, what if by making it this real, your nebulous story no longer has the endless possibility of the exciting and risk free of being a great idea? Now it has the form and clarity of something that you're closer to putting out there, something closer to being judged, something that could fail. When that happens with the authors I coach, it shows how much they need this step, even if we have to work through some discomfort, because it tells me the story isn't clear enough yet for them or to meet reader expectations. But I see this shift all the time. Once an author can fit the whole story into two precise sentences, that's the sweet spot for them to know exactly what they're promising and what their story needs to do. There's a reason this super short guiding premise works. We know from brain science that defining a problem, which could also look like following story structure or outlining, is necessary for creative solutions that can solve that problem. In our case, we're defining a story with a guiding premise. The process of creativity in the brain involves a dynamic interplay between the default mode network, or DMN, which is the spontaneous idea generator, and the executive control network, or ECN, which organizes, focuses, and evaluates those ideas. The initial idea phase, like the story seed I talked about more in this previous video, is primarily the DMN at work. But when you push yourself to formalize that idea into a concise guiding premise, you are activating the ECN to define the problem parameters. This foundational work provides the boundaries needed to prevent your brain from constantly starting over, which is a key obstacle to moving past that messy middle. By starting with this definition, you actually free up your daydreamer brain, the DMN, and language networks for a faster, smoother drafting experience. This strategic constraint, the commitment to the premise, forces your brain to think of more unhabitual or unlikely connections when plotting, which is what actually makes your story more creative. In other words, once you know what your story is promising, its core driver type, and what that makes your genre and tone, you can better deliver on those promises, even far more creatively than if you hadn't defined it this tightly in the first place. Having this guiding premise works with your brain's natural processes, making it possible to overcome that initial creative discomfort of moving into something a little too tangible and real, and giving you the lodestone by which you can test future decisions and keep the story focused. So, once you've got your two sentence premise, or even if you can't quite get it down to just one or two sentences, how do you know when it's clear enough? How do you test if it actually proves your idea is strong enough to carry a whole novel? That's what I'm breaking down in the video on your screen now.